Dark romance is a genre that has come under heavy criticism for its romanticization of taboo topics like abuse, obsession, crime, and general violence. While this genre has been around for years, it has only recently entered the mainstream as publishers look to find the next reading trend after the booming success of the romantasy genre. With this, more people have become exposed to dark romance, and this has sparked a debate around the ethics of writing and reading these books. Defenders will claim that it's all just fiction, so it's not that big of a deal, as well as we can give people, mostly women, a safe space in which to explore certain kinks. Critics point out how the genre overwhelmingly glorifies violence to women, romanticizes controlling behavior, as well as normalizes abuse within a relationship. Both sides have their points and opinions, but what is commonly ignored in these conversations is the origins of where dark romance came from. Many like to think that modern genres just pop up out of nowhere and have no connection to the literary canon that came before. But that's just not true. Every piece of writing is a reaction, and it's influenced by the writing that came before it. While dark romance may seem new and shocking to some, I propose that it's a direct evolution and exaggeration of the themes present within the romance stories young girls are taught to aspire to in their youth. Pamela, written in 1740 by Samuel Richardson, is a prime example of a classic novel that uses the fairy tale structure to tell a romance story that inadvertently, or perhaps quite intentionally, sexualizes or romanticizes abuse. It was widely popular in its time and was first presented to the public as a conduct book for young people of both sexes. It features our young protagonist Pamela catching the eye of the son of her deceased employer, Mr. B, and the trials and tribulations she faces while trying to maintain her virginity and honor as Mr. B grows increasingly bolder in his attempts to force himself on her. From groping, kidnapping, coercion, and multiple rape attempts, Mr. B does whatever he can to get Pamela to cave into his demands. Eventually, her virtue wins out, and Mr. B comes to his senses and romances her. Pamela agrees to marry him, with them both living happily ever after. While it had its own critics at the time, many of those critics were focused on how low-class Pamela sounded, something that Richardson would fix with later editions of his novels, or how Pamela, the protagonist, was secretly a conniving vixen that swindled a poor, helpless lord into marrying her by playing hard to get. I would like to remind this poor, helpless lord tried to rape her twice within the first novel, and he sexually assaulted her many times over. The critique that it got within its own time is wildly different than the critiques it faces now, to say the least. Yet, it is within this classic novel that we see, on full display, tropes, themes, and events that have become staples of the dark romance genre, such as Richardson's portraying the sexual assault of Pamela, the protagonist of, would you guess, Pamela, as something kinda sexy, and as something people at the time can get a perverse and taboo thrill from. While the story of Pamela was at first presented as a conduct book meant to educate the youth of both sexes on why you should protect your virtue and not try to take it from others, it is speculated that framing Pamela as a conduct book was more to save face, as writing and reading for pleasure was looked down upon and considered lowbrow. Richardson, a member of the rising middle class, even published the book under a pseudonym at first, presumably to avoid the blowback people saw through his facade. But once Pamela became popular, he revealed himself and, well, people still saw through his facade, but there were Puritan times and people were desperate for smut. Richardson repeatedly writes scene after scene of Pamela being assaulted by Mr. B, the romantic lead, and having to escape him before he rapes her. Mr. B even admits to this in letter 15 of volume 1. He, Mr. B, then, though I, Pamela, struggled against him, kissed me, and said, "Whoever blamed Lucretia, the shame lay on the ravisher only, and I am content to take all the blame upon myself, as I have already borne too great a share for what I have deserved. May I, said I, Lucretia-like, justify myself by my death if I am to be used barbarously? Oh, my good girl, replied he, tauntingly, you are well read, I see, and we shall make out between us before we have done a pretty story for a romance. He then offered to kiss my neck. The rape of Lucretia, for all of us in the modern day, is a story about a Roman noblewoman who was raped and then killed herself out of shame. Mr. B takes this and within the same paragraph rephrases what he wants to do to Pamela as romantic. In a previous paragraph, he tries to coerce her into giving in by claiming that she would simply be obliging a force she could not withstand. Here is it implied that Mr. B is trying to get Pamela to cave in and give up her virtue because he believes, or wants to believe, that Pamela secretly likes what Mr. B does to her. When we look at this scene compared to similar scenes in dark romance novels, you can see the connection. Sexual assault is a common occurrence in dark romance, and these scenes are often portrayed as the romantic lead swearing they will take responsibility for the evil thing they are about to do, but secretly, the protagonist kinda likes it. We see here a scene in this classic romance novel that bar for bar plays out like a modern-day erotic scene in a dark romance. It's hard to claim that Richardson did not mean for these scenes to be erotic when they continuously happen. From Mr. B claiming he doesn't recognize Pamela as she's about to leave his employment and forcefully kissing her, to when he hides in her closet and attempts to rape her in her own bed. These scenes happen over and over again for 278 pages. We can conclude then that Richardson uses rape and sexual assault in Pamela as less of a moral lesson and more of as a way to get around cultural taboos around depicting sexual acts. It is not a leap to say that this could heavily influence some people, particularly more suppressed women. This does not mean that the readers at the time would then want to be raped in real life, but when these assault and rape scenes are the only way that the people could express themselves sexually while maintaining their social dignity, then the brain can draw a correlation between fictional assault and pleasure. Within the last century, society has experienced a cultural shift that has normalized more explicit sex scenes. Yet a single century does not undo the damage done in centuries past, nor does it grant everyone equal access to these more explicit materials, particularly in more conservative or censored areas. So we have this interesting intersection of a society that's more open to more explicit sex scenes, as well as the continued repression of sexuality in women. Is it such a surprise then that we see a more prominent rise in the dark romance genre than in decades past? That more people are willing to explore these taboos and kinks? We really shouldn't be surprised. In fact, fairy tales for generations have used the premise of sexual assault and imprisonment as the cornerstones of their love stories, while many modern retellings tend to clean up the more distasteful aspects of these fairy tales, such as the elimination of the sexual assault and rape in Sleeping Beauty. Other stories maintain these darker aspects and simply just ignore the deeper implications. So I must ask, what do we do about these fairy tales that use imprisonment as a feature of their love stories? What do we do about stories like Beauty and the Beast? Beauty and the Beast, written by Gabrielle Suzanne Barbat de Villeneuve in 1740 and later adapted to the shorter version made known today by Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont in 1756, has become a constant source of strife for those trying to challenge society's views of the classic romance. For the purpose of this essay, I will be referencing the modern understanding of the classic fairy tale, and not the original story or adaptation. Many modern retellings have done their work to clean up the story, but one aspect has always remained the same. The beast takes the protagonist hostage. Critics argue that this is a complete violation of the protagonist's autonomy, treating the protagonist as collateral for the father's mistakes, all while the beast tries to make the protagonist fall in love with them. Defenders argue that it's okay that the beast takes the protagonist hostage because she did it willingly and he treats her well. They also claim that because the beast does let her go at one point and the protagonist comes back on her own, that what happens between them wasn't coercion, but true love. Pamela, like Beauty and the Beast, is also set up as a fairy tale romance. The difference between the two is that with Pamela, modern readers are given enough insight into Mr. B and the horrors he inflicts upon her to acknowledge the extreme sexual abuse and manipulation tactics on display. Yet readers in the past still viewed Pamela as a love story that they could hope and aspire for. In many ways, it is because Pamela, a common girl, is able to fix Mr. B by being virtuous and steadfast in her morals that she is able to change him, and so she gets rewarded by being elevated in status, much like in Cinderella. One aspect in which Pamela's virtuousness and morals are tested is in the second half of Volume 1, when Mr. B kidnaps her. By not giving in to his demands, he eventually sees the error of his ways and lets her go, with Pamela eventually going back when Mr. B is ill and nursing him back to health. Now, doesn't this sound like a particular fairy tale you know? While it is probably pure coincidence that these two fairy tale romances contain very similar plot points, many modern readers have different reactions to it. Pamela is hated for this plot point, and many are able to point out the flaws and unhealthy mindset it encourages. Beauty and the Beast, on the other hand, is still widely beloved, despite the imprisonment and fixing of the Beast being large parts of the story. Many argue it is because the moral of Beauty and the Beast is don't judge a book by its cover, that the protagonist is thus fixing the Beast, instead seeing that there is someone to love under the monstrous appearance. To that I would argue, why has the imprisonment part been maintained in these modern retellings? Why can't Beauty learn to love the Beast in an environment where she is not forced to be near him? Modern retellings are not new to taking out the distasteful aspects of fairy tales, such as the gruesome fate Cinderella's stepsisters face in the Brothers Grimm version of Cinderella. Yet the imprisonment remains. What does this say? That the only way to love a monster is to be trapped with one? These similar themes and outcomes found in Pamela and Beauty and the Beast are cornerstones of the dark romance genre. Kidnapping and imprisonment are common features, and almost always the protagonist is given the choice to get away. Yet they choose to go back to their romantic lead. The romantic lead is often more like Mr. B and less like the Beast, horrible, cruel, and uncaring of the protagonist's boundaries. Yet, by the romantic lead kidnapping the protagonist is forced to interact with the romantic lead and eventually makes a crack in their monstrous exterior. And by the time the protagonist is given the chance to flee, they no longer want to. What I think bothers people most about dark romance is that it doesn't shy away from showing the worst of these imprisonment situations. The romantic lead often brutalizes, rape, and sometimes even cut off parts of the protagonist's body. Turns out Mr. B and the Beast won't take no for an answer, especially when the protagonist has nowhere to run. Fairy tale and traditional romance like to pretend that a man who kidnapped you would not also be a man willing to harm you. They pretend that as long as you are good and behave, that the men will eventually see the error of their ways and change. In many ways, dark romance follows this as well, but the change the romantic lead makes is not them promising to never hurt the protagonist again, but instead them promising they won't hurt the protagonist as long as the protagonist behaves. Little girls are raised on the idea that if only they tame the Beast, if only they are virtuous enough, that they will get the prince. The readers, perhaps for the first time, see all the unwritten horror in Beauty and the Beast's situation in explicit detail in the dark romance genre. The romance genre is one dominated by women. It's a genre that many turn to for escapism from their own harsh realities. They are disturbed by what they find in dark romance, and so will post online that it must be eliminated for the public good. They then go home, sit down, and read their favorite romantasy story based on Beauty and the Beast, not realizing that the dark romance story that they were just lambasting was also based on that very same fairy tale. I am not here to say whether dark romance is or is not a problematic genre. My goal is to show a connection between this modern genre and the works that came before it, to give a bit of context and show a connecting background for those who may not have considered it before. Whether you are for, against, or, like many others, not even aware of the dark romance genre, I hope that I was able to lay the groundwork for how dark romance builds and expands upon what came before. The dark romance did not create these themes, but instead simply expanded on the themes found in many classic works. This is not an exhaustive list of all the examples and influences that dark romance takes from. I am simply hoping to show dark romance's connection to the literary canon that came before. We experience everything based on the context of what came before. You may be reading a book like A Court of Thorns and Roses and think that's all just a bit of fun and to turn your brain off. But that book exists because Sarah J. Maas read and heard other romance stories that inspired them and made them ask questions and influenced their writing. The same stories also had their own authors that went through the same thing, and so on and so forth, since humans learned how to communicate with each other. We are all connected, and so are our stories. One person may have read Cinderella and decided to make a coming-of-age story. Another person may have read it and decided to make a horror. That does not change the fact that these two very different stories still share the same grounding influence in Cinderella. If you have ever asked yourself, how did someone come up with these ideas, then you have stumbled upon the main question behind the thesis of this essay. While many may find stories like Pamela to be distasteful in the modern day, it's important that we study them and not forget them. Imagine if, in 100 years, a book like Lord of the Rings is scrubbed from the literary canon because the people at the time disliked the themes presented within it, but then try to study a book like A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. The people studying the book would be missing crucial context for why George R.R. Martin made some of the decisions that he did and why he didn't give in to certain tropes. These books are the foundation for why we have the genres and reading habits we do today. If we are to understand these modern genres as they come up, then we must understand the works that came before. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither are the books that are on your bookshelf.